As a baby moves towards sleeping through the night, it's very common to have a time period where your baby is waking up every night around 5 to 6 a.m. It's super common. What was 2 to 3 a.m. naturally shifts later and later until it becomes earlier and earlier. The question becomes, what do I do as a parent when my baby is waking up at 5 to 6 a.m.? Do I treat this like a night feed or like an early morning feed? Is this the beginning of the day or is this still nighttime? And most importantly, how do I get this to be more at where I want to be the beginning of the day instead of 5 to 6 a.m.? We will talk about 5 strategies to get your baby sleeping past this 5 to 6 a.m. time and to your optimal morning wake time. Hello there, my name is Valerie. I blog at babywisemom.com and have been doing so since 2007. I have 4 children ranging in ages from 8 to 15 currently, and I love helping parents love to be parents. So that is what I do on my blog and what I do on all of my social media channels. Whenever someone has a baby that is waking 5 to 6 a.m., the first question is always, is this normal or is this a concern? So now you know it's normal. The next question, of course, is, okay, it's normal. How long will this last? Of course, there's no way to know for sure. It varies from baby to baby. All 4 of my babies had periods of time where they woke up from 5 to 6 a.m. and the length varied from baby to baby. It ranged from just a few days to a few weeks. I have great news for you. I have 5 strategies that you can try to get your baby past this 5 to 6 a.m. night waking and sleeping to your optimal morning wake up time. Speaking of optimal wake up time, I want to make sure you focus on 2 important goals during these 5 strategies. One is make sure you do your best to start each day at the same time each day. This is so important to getting to that sleeping through the night goal. So if your ultimate goal is 7 a.m., you still need to get baby up at 7 a.m., even if baby was just up at 5 a.m. You can fluctuate within a 30-minute window. So you can say, okay, my goal is 7 a.m., but my fluctuation is 7 to 7:30 a.m. You can change your goal. If your goal was 7 a.m. and now you're like, maybe let's change it to 8 a.m., you can do that. But pick a time, be consistent within 30 minutes. Also, on the other end of the day, you really want to work towards having a very consistent bedtime each day. These 2 things will help immensely in getting past this 5 to 6 a.m. night waking. So strategy number 1 is to treat this 5 to 6 a.m. waking like a night feed. This strategy 1, is the strategy I want you to start with no matter what. I want everyone to start with strategy number 1. So what you will do when your baby wakes up is you will feed at that time, and then you'll put baby right back down. You probably won't unswaddle your baby if baby's still swaddled. There won't be a diaper change unless there's if there's a messy diaper, always change the diaper, but otherwise don't change the diaper. Just feed baby, put baby right back down. And then you are going to get baby up at that same start time that you have as your goal for each day. And then you're going to pay attention to how that first feeding goes. If your baby eats well at the 5 to 6 a.m. feeding and eats well at your very first feeding of the day, that means that your baby needed that 5 to 6 a.m. feeding still. And if that's the case, you're going to stick with that 5 to 6 a.m. feeding and this first feeding of the day until your baby either sleeps through the night until that first feeding or stops eating well for that first feeding. If your baby does not eat well for the first feeding of the day, then you know both of these feedings are not needed anymore and it's time to move on to another strategy. With my oldest child, Brayden, we did this feeding at 5 to 6 a.m. until he just started sleeping through until his morning wake up time. So for that child, we did it until it ended and that worked out great. Okay, time for strategy 2. You have determined by trying strategy 1 that your baby no longer needs that 5 to 6 a.m. night feeding. So strategy 2 to get baby past this is to slowly wean from the 5 to 6 a.m. feeding. Weaning from something is always a great option to try with babies. It's always gentle on baby, which means it's gentle on you. Everyone can feel good about trying it and putting forth the necessary time and effort to get it done. Weaning takes longer, so you have to have patience. You're not going to start weaning day 1 and by night 2, baby's sleeping through the night. But it's gentle and it's something you can be consistent with. So what you do is simply you start by feeding this 5 to 6 a.m. feeding at the normal time with the normal amount that you typically do. And then over time, you slowly wean. So if you're breastfeeding, you would slowly cut back on the amount of time baby is spending nursing at that time. If you are bottle feeding, then you will slowly cut back on the number of ounces that you give baby at this time. This strategy is a strategy that I use with my second born child, my daughter Caitlin. I was breastfeeding, and at the time, Caitlin took 10 minutes per side at each feeding. So I started off initially with the 10 minutes per side, and then after a day or two, then I moved it to 7 minutes per side. So after 7 minutes, I would switch her during this feeding, just this one feeding, switch her sides. A few days later, I cut it back to 5 minutes per side. And I did this for a few days, and then eventually I cut one side out altogether. So she was down to about 5 minutes on one side instead of 20 minutes total. So over time, slowly cutting back the amount of food she's intaking with the goal that in her other feedings during the day, she'll make up for that and she'll take in more ounces at the other feedings to make up for the ounces she's not getting at the 5 to 6 a.m. feeding anymore. So slowly adjusting her metabolism and slowly adjusting my milk production to make up for her eating more at other times of day. And it worked. After a little bit, she just stopped waking up at that 5 to 6 a.m. time and slept to her goal time of 7:30 in the morning. Okay, next let's talk about strategy 3. This is to slowly delay the start time of that 5 to 6 a.m. feeding. So you've tried strategy 1, you know baby doesn't really need that feeding. Maybe you tried strategy 2 and your baby is still waking up even for just those 2 ounces or that 5 minutes of feeding. Or maybe you don't like the sound of strategy 2 and you want to skip that, and that's totally fine. So the next step is just simply to delay when you start that 5 to 6 a.m. feeding. This strategy really works well, especially if the feeding time is closer to 6 a.m., the time when your baby's waking up, and your goal is 7 a.m. Then you've got this awkward hour interval in between those two feedings. So what you're doing with this strategy is actually treating this 5 to 6 a.m. feeding more like your first feeding of the day rather than a middle of the night feeding. So if your baby wakes up at 6 a.m. but your goal is 7 a.m., then you spend 10 minutes distracting baby before you feed baby. So you spend 10 minutes changing the diaper or changing your baby out of pajamas, or you give baby a pacifier for 10 minutes. You do something to distract baby from expecting to eat immediately and get baby to make it to 6:10 a.m. instead of 6 a.m. for that first feeding. Your goal with this strategy is to get baby's metabolism to get used to eating later than 6 a.m. so that the need for food is coming a little later. So you work to 6:10, and then once baby goes to 6:10 alone, then you make a goal for 6:20 and you continue to push it back. You might remember at the beginning of this video, I talked about the importance of keeping a consistent first time of day and bedtime. So with this strategy, our first time of day is a little off, but our goal is working toward that. But what you need to do with the rest of your day is to adjust and compensate so that bedtime can happen at a consistent time. Otherwise, you're just shifting your entire schedule up an hour. So what you have to do is baby woke up at 6, but you wanted it to be 7. So that means throughout the day, if baby will sleep a little longer and go a little longer between other feeding intervals, allow it to happen. I would recommend that you give this strategy 3 to 7 days before giving up on it, unless you just decide, I don't like that idea anymore. But give it 3 to 7 days to see if your baby will start waking up a little later. Another option tied in with this strategy is instead of getting, when baby wakes at 6 a.m., instead of getting baby up and going forward with the day, is to try to put baby back to sleep by any means possible. So we go back to, it's okay to use a pacifier to get baby to go back to sleep, or it's okay to use a swing to get baby to sleep that extra hour. It's okay to rock baby back to sleep to get baby to go back to sleep for that extra hour in order to train the metabolism over time to make it to 7 a.m. instead of 6 a.m. Next, let's talk about strategy 4. Strategy 4 is similar to strategy 3, but you just simply treat that time that your baby's waking as the first feeding of the day. This is a great strategy if your baby's waking up even closer to that first desired wake time. So again, sticking with our 7 a.m. example, maybe your baby's waking up at 6:30 or 6:25 or 6:45. And so you just say, okay, this is the beginning of the day. And it's also a great strategy if you just find it frustrating to try to hold baby off for 10 minutes, or if your baby just can't be held off for 10 minutes, you just start with it as the first feeding of the day and you go on. Again, just like with strategy 3, it's very important to make sure you adjust the rest of your day to make sure that you get your baby to a consistent bedtime. You can even let your baby go on a 4-hour schedule for one interval to get back on track if that's what you need to do. One important note with strategy 4 is that your baby needs to be ready to drop one feeding interval in a day in order for this to work. So if your baby is in an age range where 7 feedings a day is necessary, then you can't expect to go to 6 feedings a day. So make sure you're aware of how often, how many feedings a baby should have in 24 hours before you try to cut a feeding out in a 24 hours. If you don't know that, see in the description, I will have a link for you to know how many feedings your baby should have in a 24 hours based on your baby's age. Okay, we're to our final strategy. This is strategy 5. This is cry it out. So this would be my final suggestion. I wouldn't try strategy 5 until you've tried other strategies first. And you also need to be very confident that your baby does not need to eat at that 5 to 6 a.m. time frame before going to cry it out. I personally have never had to get to strategy 5. The other strategies have worked to get my baby sleeping through the night before we got to the point of deciding of whether or not we would go with 5. I would also recommend before you try the strategy that you are confident baby isn't waking at 5 to 6 a.m. for other reasons. Hunger isn't the only reason that babies wake in the night. There can be discomfort, there can be teething, there can be it too cold or too hot at that point in the evening. If you are going to do cry it out, make sure you're committed before you start. It's okay to start and then decide, oh, this actually isn't for me, and stop, but it's not great or not okay to start, stop, start, stop, start, stop. You either need to be in or out, and it's okay to try it and decide you're out, but don't be in and out back and forth constantly. So go in or don't. Okay, that wraps it up for this 5 to 6 a.m. night waking. If you are not sure why your baby is waking, be sure to see my night sleep basics on solving nighttime wake-ups so you know for sure this is why my baby's waking up before you go forward. I do have a blog post written out with all of these strategies written down in greater detail, so if you would like to get more details, then be sure to check that post out. And as always, thank you for watching.